We will start the session now. I would like to introduce our moderator today, and then I'll hand over the mic to him. Vijay Krishna Rajgopal is the director and CLO of CLLE, that is Center for Learning, Leadership and Excellence, in the field of education for 35 years. His vision for the Center for Learning and Excellence is to facilitate the development of innovative practices that fosters capacity and community building in educators. He believes in using a collaborative framework that integrates continuous and relevant educational research, leveraging technology to impact and influence the future of learning. We welcome all the panelists. Welcome to Vijay as well. Vijay, you can take over the dais.
Thank you, Nagmani. Thank you for a short but succinct introduction of mine. Good evening, educators. Thank you for joining in despite being a weekday. We have an interesting topic lined up as a part of our panel discussion series, which we term as Talk Learning. The topic for today is how collective teacher efficacy helps build successful schools. And believing we can is the tagline that we have given for that topic. I would like to extend a very warm welcome to all the educators who have gathered here today, and a special welcome to the panelists. We have an eclectic mix of panelists today who are going to be speaking to you about this topic. I will begin by introducing each one of them to you. You have to bear with me till I finish their introductions. It is very long, but I'll do my best to cover as much ground as possible in as little time. I would start with Mrs. Minakshi Balkrishna, ma'am. Thank you so much, ma'am, for being a part of this panel discussion. Minakshi, ma'am, is a postgraduate in economics from the Madras University. She has over 32 years of diverse experience in school leadership, teaching, teacher development, administration, both in schools in the country and abroad. She has implemented the IB Primary Years program, and she continues to conduct several workshops for educators to orient them both in the national and the international curriculum. She was the PYP chair of GUJNet, an important body between the IBO office and local schools. She has been providing strategic advice pertaining to managing change and developing leadership at various levels in educational institutions. She is also an advisor at CLLE. We thank her profusely for her wisdom, her patience in trying to help CLLE reach out to as many educators as possible. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much for being a part of today's panel discussion. Next, we have Dr. Pavan Soni, an innovation evangelist by profession and a teacher by passion. He is the founder of Inflexion, a strategy and innovation consulting firm offering programs on design thinking, strategic acumen, and consulting skills. Pavan has consulted with leading organizations on innovation and creativity, organizations like 3M, Amazon, BCG, Deloitte, the list is endless. He is the author of the book, Design Your Thinking, that's been published by Penguin Random House in 2020. This book was one of the 5 books that have been shortlisted for the 2021 BBLF-CK Prahalad Best Business Book Award. He is the adjunct faculty at ISB Hyderabad and with IIM Bangalore. Pavan is a columnist at Mint, Your Story, Inc. 42, Entrepreneur, and People Matters. He authors a monthly newsletter at Inflexion, which has been in circulation since 2008 and has more than 20,000 enthusiasts across the world. Pavan was the only Indian to be shortlisted for the prestigious Financial Times and McKinsey Bracken Bauer Award for the Best Business Book of the Year 2016. He is a regular speaker at TEDx and is featured as one of the 100 digital influencers of 2020. And the list is long, but Pavan is a gold medalist from MBM Engineering College, Jodhpur, did his PGDIE from NITIE Mumbai, and his doctoral studies is from IIM Bangalore itself. Thank you so much, Pavan, for finding time to be a part of this panel discussion. It's indeed an honor to have you and talking and bringing a variety of experiences and talking about teacher efficacy and how it can help build successful schools. Last but definitely not the least, we have Dr. Senthil Kumar. He is a leading educator with over 3 decades of experience Dr. Senthil has started a groundbreaking work in the form of Learners Confluence, an educational service in India. Learners Confluence is an educational program that is focused on developing technology platform for teachers with the goals of enhancing peer learning as well as knowledge sharing. Dr. Senthil was the principal counselor and head education excellence initiatives of CII Institute of Quality until 2016 July. He joined CII in April 2002 and until recently has been helping educational institutions accelerate their journey in excellence in India and abroad. Dr. Senthil has worked as a faculty member of the strategic core group in Christ College, which is now Christ University, for 10 years before embarking on his journey with CII. In his previous role, he was responsible for many novel educational initiatives. He started CII's school excellence clusters, educational excellence programs, international learning missions to Singapore and Finland, and he has cultivated the best practices forum dedicated to mutually learn from each other in various national and regional summits. He's been speaking about quality in education, school excellence, and the list is truly long. Sir, I know I'm not doing justice and I'm not completing the resume, but
just call this a teacher. That's good enough.
I'm really glad Dr. Senthil has consented and is a part of today's panel discussion. I would once again take this opportunity to welcome all the three panelists. Thank you so much. Today's topic is indeed very interesting, especially for us educators. We have come back into regular schools after the pandemic, and indeed all of us are in a way compelled to examine our practice and look at how we can be impactful for students. So therefore, it is imperative that we need to believe that as a collective we can. And therefore, the topic is how collective teacher efficacy helps build successful schools. Now, I would like to give each of our panelists 2 minutes to share their views about what they understand as teacher efficacy and collective teacher efficacy. How do they define teacher efficacy in general? May we start with Dr. Senthil himself.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations, Vijay, on your initiative to reach out, to make a difference to the community, which constantly requires a lot of support and inputs from multiple kind of stakeholders. So congratulations to you and to the co-panelists who have kind of agreed to talk on a topic which is very close to all of us being teachers. That's first and the foremost. Coming to the topic, I think first, it's very important when you try to talk about a teacher efficacy as such as a term. I think it's very, very interesting to put it in a very layman's language, saying that what are some of the commonly agreed norms or standards. And once we have agreed on standards, then are we actually adhering? And from non-adherence or not able to do the adherence, and then how do you try to improvise on it? The good news for the teachers is, for the first time, I think we are trying to talk about a national professional teacher standards under the new education policy. While in 2006 itself, not 2021 we are talking about, in 2006 itself, it was considered that teachers need to be recognized themselves as professionals with the necessary knowledge, attitude, competency, commitment, capable of reflection, sensitive, perceptive, to not only to the learner and institution, but also the concerns which are larger in the community wherever we live. And where we as a teacher trying to that's where I think it's very important. Teacher is also considered as a change maker in a small community wherever they are. So coming back to the efficacy, agreed standards vis-a-vis, where are we with regard to that? And I think this is one area which really needs a lot of dialogue and discussion. I'll come back and then kind of add my points.
Thank you so much, Dr. Senthil. Can we hear from Dr. Pavan Soni as to what he believes is teacher efficacy and how does it manifest in schools?
Absolutely. So let me go back to the term self-efficacy. Now, the term self-efficacy was coined by Professor Albert Bandura of the Stanford University. So self-efficacy means that I believe in my capacities that I can do something and achieve a desired result. Now, self-efficacy can result into risk-taking behavior. For example, gambler's fallacy. So a gambler assumes that he or she has the right competence to gamble. At the same time, a lack of self-efficacy can be manifested in the form of what we call as lack of self-confidence. Albert Bandura also was instrumental in coining another word, which is very less known in the education parlance, which is called as guided mastery. So here's a thought experiment. So Albert Bandura was famous for this experiment about how do you overcome phobias. So many of us have a phobia for reptiles, for example, and cockroaches also people have phobias for.
Correct.
So suppose somebody has a phobia for, say, reptile and doesn't want to even look at snake, let alone come close to snake. So Albert Bandura, and I would encourage you to go and research about Albert Bandura, who is known as one of the greatest psychologists next to Sigmund Freud. So that's the reputation of Albert Bandura, actually. So Albert Bandura made people comfortable touching a snake. The people who are afraid of even the sight of a snake on a photograph. Now, how do you take somebody from being frightful of the sight of a snake to touching the snake? That process is called guided mastery. What teachers are supposed to do is to go through the process of guided mastery oneself and then take the students through the journey of guided mastery. Once we develop that I can guide somebody from a phobia state to a state of affection, or at least tolerance, if not affection, is what the teacher is supposed to do. So I think that is the context of why we use the word efficacy. My view is that the reason efficacy has become a very pronounced topic lately, and I'm so happy that we are having the discourse today, is twofold. The first is the pandemic has started putting the question back to the teaching fraternity that in the world where so much of a content is available at the click of the mouse, what is the role of the teacher after all? Why should a teacher be there if the students have learned to learn on themselves at home using YouTube? Why do teachers are required at all? And this has only gotten amplified and compounded with the pandemic. Before pre-pandemic, the amount of content available on MOOC or elsewhere really put a big question mark on the marginal utility of a teacher. And during the course of today's session, I would like to offer my perspective that how teachers can become even more relevant, because the relevance of the teachers in the community is going to have a very big impact on self-belief and hence self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is not so much inward out. Self-efficacy is also outward in. So that is where I'll park my thoughts, but I'll have two pointers which I would like my fellow teachers to possibly work on to re-ensure that we still have a very big relevance. And mind it, relevance is not natural. Relevance is something that has to be fought for. Every day we need to fight for our relevance in this context. Otherwise, there is no guarantee that we can assure our relevance, let alone efficacy. So that's my starting thoughts here, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Pavan, for your starting comments about self-efficacy. I think you brought out a very important point, saying that students learn despite schools. Now that draws me into getting Minakshi ma'am's view on why do you think it is relevant? Why do you think it is relevant that we're not just looking at self-efficacy of an individual teacher? Why should we look at collective teacher efficacy?
So I think first, every teaching practice has some effect. It's the degree at which this improves that learning is what matters. So what happens is when a teacher gets into the class, she's talking about how best she can do. And I think Dr. Pavan and Dr. Senthil already explained to you what the definition of self-efficacy is. Bandura also talked about, apart from performance outcomes, he talked about how teachers and they're able to gauge children and students based on how they are able to perform. So the ability to perform is also one of the yardsticks of what Bandura talked about. He also talked about how you compare, that is the level at which you stand and how you compare students based on a certain set parameters. That also defines how self-efficacy can be explained. Another part would be verbal encouragement, and that is largely good verbal communication always sort of sets the teacher and the students to bring out the best in the student. Now, the most important of all of it is the psychological feedback. What are the emotional influences? And way back in, if you go back to Bloom's, the brain and the cognitive domain, the affective domain and the psychomotor domain all of it, which is part of a student's journey to learn. How the teacher tries to maximize her cultural beliefs, her beliefs and values to gain and get knowledge for the children and to bring about that certain amount of standards in the classrooms or in the place of learning, that would be paramount. So collective efficacy would be largely how everyone together brings in a vision. That is the heads of schools, the coordinators, everyone is a leader. Every teacher is a leader. The leader defines how the whole culture of the, I would call school an organization, and what is that organizational culture that you want to trickle. So if you have a feeling of righteousness or empathy or humility, you would practice that as a school. And that would be very necessary for heads of schools and for the management to make that appear, whether it's in your vision statement or your mission statement or your mottos. And that would bring about a collective efficacy of the school for a common goal.
Now that brings us to an interesting point where ma'am is speaking about the school culture. And we are continuing to debate about the value of the collective. Now, I would like to hear from both Dr. Senthil and Dr. Pavan. Why is it so important for us to focus on the culture of a school? Because when we are indeed talking about collective efficacy, the mindset of the teachers, the way in which they need to prepare, why is the culture of a school so important? Either of you could go first.
Yeah, Pavan, go ahead.
Dr. Pavan?
Pavan, you're muted.
Oh, should I go ahead, guys?
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
Okay. So I'll use a whiteboard to write down a few things. So first of all, some of these things might be a little provocative, and so the key is students are not taught, they learn. Okay. And when I write this statement, I mean for at any level. We are never taught, we learn. Okay. So it applies to all. So the role of a teacher, hence, is to create a learning environment. Through my years of teaching at corporate context, for example, right now I'm sitting at this very beautiful campus of a college, of a corporate, actually. It's called Bosch Learning Center. It's a fantastic, pristine. I'll give you perspective on how beautifully they have done this campus. There's a corporate office. Okay. This is a learning center which is dedicated to teaching. And the reason why they have invested so much money and patience to create such a green environment, or if you walk into IIM Bangalore campus, is because of fundamental belief that if a teacher can create a learning environment, children will automatically learn. So the role of the teacher is to create a learning environment. There are 3 practical tips which I would like to offer to my teachers on how do you create a learning environment. The first is psychological safety. Psychological safety. What is psychological safety? Psychological safety means that the students believe that I will not get reprimanded if I ask a question which is out of tune, or I'll not get reprimanded if I contest a teacher who is saying that. And I believe that unless and until we create a psychological safety in the classroom, you would never have a variance of discussion. You will never have some interesting thoughts that will come up. So that's the first thing the teacher needs to have. Now, for psychological safety to be given in the classroom, what I need to do is a teacher needs to learn to be vulnerable by choice. What I mean by being vulnerable by choice. Suppose a student asks a question to a teacher. How comfortable is a teacher saying, I don't know? I'll get back to you. It's a good question, but I don't know the answer. Unless and until a teacher is willing to admit that she does not know the answer, she'll try to pretend. And there are instances which we have seen where the students end up knowing more than the teacher, because the teacher still knows what is taught, but the student is far more curious. So teacher needs to now start to understand that, and this is learning the question or knowing the question is compulsory. Answering it is optional. If teachers are comfortable with this, that I need to know the question, whether I can answer it or not, that is optional because I may not know the answer. So your willingness to admit that I do not know the answer is very, very critical. I, as a teacher, find it far comfortable to know that I have my own limits and you should be willing to admit the limit. And which comes from a deep sense of empathy. A deep sense of empathy. And empathy is not same as sympathy or pity. Empathy means that you can develop a deep sense of empathy provided you are willing to listen with intent and listen to the meaning and not just words. So I'll just pause here and give you 3 of these items, which is a deep sense of empathy that we need to have for our students. We need to have a vulnerability by choice, and we need to offer people psychological safety so that they know it's safe to disagree. And this comes when teacher knows that today I will learn something new. Like how many teachers go into a class by this notion that aaj kuch naya sikhenge. Aaj kuch naya sikhenge. I learned something new today. Aaj kuch naya sikhayenge, people go with that thought, but aaj kuch naya sikhenge, very few people go with that thought. So if we can have a teacher as a curious teacher, and that is where the learning environment is the most important thing. Content comes secondary. If I can create a learning environment, children will learn on their own. They would love to come to your class, and then learning is incidental. So that's my view here.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Pavan. I think he has definitely touched upon certain key points that can be attributed to a culture of the school, whether it is for the students or the teachers. I would like to ask Dr. Senthil to pitch in here and speak a little bit about what it means for the school culture. If we have, I know Pavan is talking from the perspective of students and believes that teachers, if they have the right kind of attitudes, learning is going to implicitly happen amongst the students. So, sir, where do you think that the power of the collective needs to be harnessed, and how does it matter that we have the right culture in the schools, in our school?
Thank you, Pavan, I think, for triggering the perspective of student perspective, which is very, very important, because at the end of the day, you can't, pull a plant to make it to grow. Only you need to create an environment to make sure that the plant grows properly. I think that's just to put it in one statement, what Pavan said. I think it makes a lot of sense. But give me a couple of minutes to basically put a simple equation, which is called as 4a plus 2i is equal to c. Let me try to put it as 4a plus 2i is equal to a c. Now, what is this 4a's that I'm trying to talk about is very, very important. The first A is about the right awareness. Do we have the right awareness about what kind of culture that I'm trying to get into? What is the kind of thought process that I'm trying to, take it across is something very, very important. That's the most important point. The awareness again about the subject, the role, the campus where I am working with. I join an institution in the first 5 to 7 years. I think it is very, very important for people to understand the cultural context of the institution where they are trying to, in Indian parlance, is, nai bahu kind of coming into that particular family. So if I come into a family, I really need to know what kind of family I'm getting, what are the ethos, what are the values that exist in that particular thing. I need to have the right awareness. So that's my first A. If I have the right awareness, based on the right awareness, I go to the second A, which is all about assessment. I assess for efficacy or for anything in the campus based on my awareness. Based on my awareness, I always try to assess people. It reminds me of Professor Y.S. Rajan in his book, Way Beyond 3 Hours. I think he writes very beautifully about it. He completes his SLC and goes to Mumbai. And when to do his graduation, and whenever he comes back to his native, always his grandfather used to ask one question: Nambi, did you clear Did you clear SSLC or ESLC? Those days it will be 8th standard as a 10th class exam or 8th standard examination. Did you clear? Because the whole challenge which comes in very, very interesting is that the people who are asking the right kind of question, do they have the right kind of awareness? If you don't have the right awareness, then you will go back and always ask this particular question. Like a typical situation in a classroom, we expect that we teach a concept, and then we try to expect the answer what we know, not what the child knows or what the child can add. And then once we get the answer, then there's a bright smile on our face, and we are very happy about it, saying, hey, no, I have that the children have learned whatever I'm trying to talk about it. I think that's where. So based on awareness, our assessment criteria gets defined. So when we are trying to talk about efficacy and culture, I think it is very, very important for us to understand this particular perspective. Based on 2 A's, the third A is very, very important for a teacher is acceptance. And that acceptance comes from accepting that I know that I don't know. Accepting that I know that I don't know. I think it's a very difficult question for the teachers. Today, we may say that there is a shift, but I think it's not going to work. It's not going to work because people still, if somebody asks a question which is little personal, people get offended and say that, oh, why are you asking this question? This is not part of the syllabus, what I'm supposed to be here. And the last day is something very, very important, which is all about attitude. If you don't have the right attitude, the first 3A will never happen. The first 3A will never happen. And I think that's something very, very important for all of us to look at it. So this 4 A's must happen at 2I. One is capital I and second is small I. Let me start with small I. The small I is all about individuals. Individuals, teacher as an individual. So every individual need to have awareness, assessment, acceptance, and attitude. So this cycle needs to be constantly working upon. And I think that's something very, very important as an individual. And if you go to Peter Senthil, I think he very beautifully says, institutions don't learn. It's the individual in the institutions who learn. So when individuals learn collectively, the efficacy will come. So that learning, whatever is happening in the institution, needs to be kind of connected to institution. And that's where the role. So institution must also do constantly increase their awareness on the subject area or the whatever that they want their teachers to be doing. Second part, they should be constantly assessing themselves to make sure that I think the life becomes much more easier. And they should accept that, we really need to go back and sit down and rework on what we have aspired while creating this particular institution. And I think that's something very, very important. So individual, institution, 4 A's are very, very important. And if these 4 A's at individual level and institution level, if it is not happening, the C will not happen. The C's are not only about the change for creating a better culture than yesterday. Otherwise, what will happen? We may celebrate anniversaries after anniversaries, silver jubilee to golden jubilee, but then the campus is still running in the old model. So while the ethos values of old are important, like Pavan said, we really need to bring in some new technology, new thought processes, and be relevant to the time. Be relevant to the time, because many times what we find, teachers feel that kuch nahi ho sakta, nothing can happen. And I think a classic example, which I always say, is most of the schools have not invested on teacher training when it came to technology. They were not prepared for such a situation. So what exactly happened? The so-called the heroines of the campus were the senior teachers. The senior teachers were the heroines of the campus. But then suddenly these youngsters, they became heroines during the pandemic time because they had the know-how of technology. So how did it work in India? How did it work in India was the seniors worked with the youngsters and the willingness to learn. I think pandemic actually brought out the best thing of a teacher in India. And I salute every teacher who's present or whoever is going to see this, that you were not empowered, but you did learning. I'm not talking about learning. You engaged the classes very, very beautifully. There was a lot of engagement happened. Whether learning happened or not, I'm not very sure about it, but engagement actually happened. So these 4 A's plus 3I is something which is very, very important. And I rest my thing. I would like to hear from others too.
Thank you, sir. It's very interesting that you brought about the difference between both the individuals and the institution and the need for greater congruence. it's not always the case that, you add up the individuals, then you end up getting the institutional
Yeah.
vision. So there is something else that needs to be done for the collective of individuals to coalesce in a manner where the institution benefits. And when the institution benefits, by corollary, even the individuals in it benefit. Now, I wanted to ask the panelists, can you suggest some practical ideas by which we are able to look at how the individuals can contribute to the institution and the institution can contribute to the individuals? Practical examples from your own spheres of influence, your own spheres of experience, that's really going to give the teachers, the educators who are a part of today's panel discussion, something to take home and something that they can try in their classrooms and indeed their schools. Minakshi ma'am?
Yeah, so before we start, I wanted to share about the organizational culture, or we're talking about a school culture. Very clearly, the management, the principals, and the leadership, they must understand what are their desired results. What is it that they are looking for? What is the goal that they're looking for? Discuss all the big ideas and skills that are necessary to develop that organizational culture. Another very important thing is to determine the evidence that is required. What is the evidence required for some of those practices that you will have as part of the organization culture? And then a checklist for the planned outcome. So you have all these objectives in your lessons or what you're trying to get together. But what would be the planned outcome? That would be very important as an organizational culture or a school culture. But then most important, and I think Dr. Senthil and Dr. Pavan both emphasized, that it's like shared learning that's really important, where we expect all the experiences and the instructions that let me not be afraid. Let me not be afraid of going into the class and saying, I don't know. Let us learn together. That should be the shared experience. And then provide those instructions whereby they understand those instructions and take it forward, which also means that these strategies for the organization or for the school culture will bring in positive results. And this would thereby bring about some intellectual competence. How is that intellectual competence happening is maybe I would suggest that one of the suggestions would be to have peer shadowing the classrooms, looking at papers, like Dr. Senthil said, understanding what the school is all about. How are they going to emphasize what are the practices of a particular school? What are the things that they need to deliver? How is this going to be delivered? Even small things like an annual day, is there an SOP for that? So the most important is when a teacher walks in, like he said, like Nahi Dulan hai, how to bring, so she's come with a little bit of soil. So put that soil into this new place, let it grow, and let other teachers help each other. Another team building exercise would be to share their practices. Not say I, but we as a team get together and share our experiences. Oh, this went off very well. And that as a practice. That is a practice in your staff meetings or in your coordinators meetings, or there are several other meetings where you would share your experiences. Oh, this went very well. This is something that I've read. This is the latest in teaching practices that I would like to share with the teachers. And that would bring, a cohesive, outlook towards the desired goals that you have in your mind. What is it that we want? When you're talking about student performance, how does that student performance happen? Because we're collectively trying to bring the best in the children, the potential of making it the best, also defining what that best is, not by terms of marks, but a holistic experience of what the school is trying to talk about: attitudes, values, beliefs. And what is that learner profile? When you go out of that portals of the school, what kind of a student am I? That would be my take on that.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Pavan, Soni, your thoughts on some practical insights that educators can take away as they figure out how the collective efficacy can be fostered? You're muted, Pavan.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was just busy taking down notes because I thought it's a good practice to take down notes, and then everybody at the end of the session can take a screenshot There are many times, because of traveling, etc., we don't take notes. And there is so much of an interesting discussion happening. Why not take down notes? So as a teacher, I've been teaching for a fairly long time now, but most of my teaching happens at the adult level. So most of it is at an IIM Bangalore or at an ISB or with very senior executives. And I often find it that I have to speak to the child within the adult. And that is often very, very difficult. So my tip is threefold: that how do we develop more efficacy? I'll just write the three things down as my practical tips. And I'm just telling you those things that have apparently worked for me. The first is co-create the content with your audience. So what I have started doing is that in my programs nowadays, I don't go with a PPT. I go with a whiteboard like this one. And I say that the first question I ask is that, what's your question? And through that entire day that I have spent with these people, no PPT is used. And in the process of answering the questions to these people, we co-create the entire course. So there is no point in telling somebody that does not answer a question, because when you ask me a question and I tell you the answer to that question, the propensity that you will remember it is far higher. So a teacher should go with the mindset that can I co-create the context and the content with the audience, not from the position that I know and they need to learn. No, they can tell me what they need to learn and I can co-create. So that is one very, very important thing. The second thing is knowing that an open mind is not an empty mind. What I mean by that is that often I say that a teacher needs to go to a class with an open mind. That maybe the students say that we have learned all this, ma'am. Tell us something new. ये सब पढ़ लिया मैडम हमने बायजूस पे, कुछ नया सिखाओ. Now teacher is not ready for that kind of a question. What do we do? Which means that a teacher needs to be fully prepared, but at the same time be completely open to any possibility. So that requires a lot of humility. So go ahead with fully prepared, but not with confidence that I know it all and you don't have. So that is first co-creation. The second is, and the last thing is that convert tacit knowledge into explicit knowledge. Now, I don't think there is anybody in the audience who will agree that writing these things down was a bad idea or was not a good idea. Everybody would agree that it was a good idea, isn't it? Correct? Why is it a good idea? Now, people are saying with such a wisdom, all these knowledgeable things, but unless and until you capture it, it doesn't get registered in the mind. So what is very much required in our communications between teachers is that we have enough white space in the classroom where you start jotting down things. And that's what we say, and I'll rest my case here, that we need to think with our hands. Think with your hands. We often don't think with our hands. We think with our mouth. We need to think with our hands. Start writing down things. Start sketching them. Start doodling them. Use your clay and all these things to kind of do modeling. And you'll be surprised that even at a level where, I'm just coming out of a class where I've taught people who are 55 years of age. And if I give them clay model and Lego blocks, you can see wonderful stuff coming out of them. So we need to develop the right brain. We have become very left brain people over these years. So just these three tips, which I just used today throughout the day, and I've been using. So co-create the content with the team. Second thing is go with the open mind, not with the empty mind. Go fully prepared, but there is no reason for you to bombard them. No, don't use PPTs. That's one practical tip. And try to convert tacit knowledge to explicit knowledge. Don't try to convert explicit to explicit. When you make a PPT and you deliver a PPT, is explicit to explicit. Implicit to explicit means tacit to explicit means I'm speaking, we are having a discussion, we start keying down the stuff. So create new knowledge. What we are doing today in this session is we are creating new knowledge. Correct? And if you put this on YouTube, if you put this somewhere else, it can be a good starting point for a next discussion. So teachers should not go with the intent of imparting knowledge. it might be a good idea to go with the intent of creating new knowledge and not creating new knowledge with, creating with a new knowledge with all of us too. And that is where Swami Vivekananda very famously said that education is the perfection that you already have within you. So teacher is not teaching anything from outside. The teacher is eliciting what the child already knows and yet doesn't realize. So you're bringing the knowledge from within the child and not putting anything from outside. So that perspective is very critical, in my humble opinion, for teaching at any level. That's about it.
Thank you, Dr. Pavan. I think the tenets of social constructivism has indeed come out in what Dr. Pavan had to say, especially when you look at the relevance, not only for students, but also when teachers engage with each other. Bringing out tacit knowledge, I think, has a lot of benefits. And that, I think, is definitely going to drive a lot of innovation within schools because of the quantum of experience that exists within the educators. Dr. Senthil, may I invite you to share your...
Yeah, with limited work for a few years now in education, my experience working with schools, colleges, and universities across the country and outside says that we have not very clearly defined any kind of a framework when it comes to teacher standards per se. We don't have any framework. People talk about we have a framework, but I'm still to find a good framework or a framework where it basically talks about three important components when a management or a school really needs to kind of look at it. Where are we talking about the domain related competencies which are required for a teacher is being scribed very, very clearly, saying that these are the 5 things which every teacher must start looking for. I may be an old teacher. Everybody talks about when we go to a school, Hamare yahan, for so many years, we have been following this. We have been following this. This is a practice. This is a practice. And that's where I always keep saying that there are a lot of, mother-in-laws and young daughter-in-laws in the campus who never allow these youngsters to basically kind of even think little differently and then say, okay, can we bring a shift in this whole thought process as such? So the first and the foremost thing is that, do we really have a framework which defines very, very clearly that what are the domain specific? It can contain something like the knowledge of the subject, whatever they are trying to teach, the profile of the people whom they are trying to teach, what are some of the methods that are available to make this learning, like Dr. Pavan made a mention about co-creation. I don't think the co-creation actually happens. It's only content pushing. You push as much content in the most adaptive. And now I think one trend I've been, last 2 months I've been going to school post-pandemic, and every child or every teacher is complaining. Children are asking, can you please push the notes through WhatsApp group? Now they don't want to write. They just want to push the content. Now for them, the learning is more about, pushing things. And one classic example, which most of us will understand who have gone through, who are part of a school, when MCQ came in for the first term examination, when multiple choice question assessments came up in the 10th and 12th examination by both the national boards, I think it was a huge challenge in the country with the schools. They still fall, they just did Control-C, Control-V from somewhere and said, this, where was the Bloom? If they had a better understanding of Bloom, then they would have understood lots and lots very clearly. And probably that would have helped them to design the questions itself better. And designing a good question itself is a good attribute of a teacher. How I design a good MCQ itself is an attribute. And that's where when we were working with schools, we said, can you co-create questions? Why are you going and surfing here and there? Why are you surfing here and there? Co-create the question. Give the choices and ask them to create the question. Ask them to create a question and what are the typical wrong answers are coming in, and you know what is the right answer and closest right answer. Why don't you capture that? I think that's something very, very important. So the domain related framework is something which is missing. The second part is that all of us talk about in the institution something called as R&R. We use R&R, roles and responsibility we define for a principal till the new staff. We have been defining where exactly there is a matrix to basically say that if I'm a principal, every principal is supposed to take 10 hours in the as per CBSE norms, 10 hours they're supposed to take every week. But where exactly that's happening? Nowhere it's happening. Timetable it is there, but no. So we really need to define that academic administration and general administration. Are we trying to define the roles like this very, very clearly? When I'm a teacher, a subject teacher, I do 80% of teaching learning practice and 20% of actual academic administration I do, or anything which is being given. So I don't have a clarity in, these roles and responsibility. Probably a lot of discussion still needs to be done in this particular space. The third area is more about the behavior of the teacher. Now this behavior, and particularly post-COVID, because of the teacher burnout across the country and outside the country, multiple researchers have shown during starting of the COVID, during the COVID and end of the COVID, people have felt that teacher burnout has happened maximum. So is there something which was agreed minimum thing what a teacher behavior should be when it comes to his or her colleague, his parent, his peers, his own seniors, his own principal, management? And I think this is something very, very important which people really do. So we don't have a framework. When you don't have a framework, how are we even talking about the efficacy part of it? So I think it's very important. We need to co-create something called as, this is the aspiration of the institution. And to achieve this particular aspiration, can we have a framework? And in this particular framework, can we start aligning? Because today, when we go to schools, we find there are very good question paper setters available in one set of schools. There are very good teachers, but they don't know how to prepare questions. So probably if they had a good complementing competencies which are available within a department, I think that itself will start making the school. And I can tell you, we are working with multiple schools and we have been able to find a lot of value in this. So today, when we have a framework, recruitment till asking somebody, recognizing somebody in the whole journey, we are able to actually see all these things happening. And this is possible and doable.
Thank you so much, sir. I mean, the notion of efficacy, the notion of progress, and the notion of change is so ephemeral that, there are too many options and too many variations in the way we approach it. Now, I would like to pose a slightly different question to the panelists. I would like to invoke Andy Hargreaves here. He speaks of what is called as contrived collegiality. Of course, on the one hand, we are talking of, efficacy, the need for teachers to come together, the need for educators to come together and understand the shared purpose of an institution. That is at one end of the spectrum. What if it becomes contrived collegiality? How do institutions, how do individuals, how do educators avoid the tendency to get into that kind of a mode? Minakshi ma'am, would you like to start?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, we have to look at what the school is desiring to be. What is it that I want in terms of looking at the whole school scenario? What would be the framework in that sense? When Dr. Senthil spoke about the framework, I would talk about what is the conceptual lens that we are looking at. What are all those things, areas in which teachers can look at concepts and go about understanding concepts? Now, if you look at the uniqueness of each child and the uniqueness of the teacher herself, where is that big gap? Where is the achievement gap between them? And that would be something that will have to be questioned by every single person. So it becomes philosophical in a sense, what is almost like existentialism, what is my purpose of life? What is it that I'm trying to do? And what Mr. Senthil said that, somebody's always going to put you down, somebody's not going to take with you. So it's like the story of the walnut and the marigold. Be with the marigolds and less with the walnut trees. So that would help you sort of encourage the way in which you bring about certain things in the school itself. But most important would be how to create learner-centered classrooms. Conceptual, in the sense like when you throw the textbook out, what is the concept that you're teaching? What is it that you want? Ask questions. Start with asking questions, bringing curiosity, bringing the inquiry process. I would also like to add where there are two major aspects of appreciative inquiry and humble inquiry. Appreciative inquiry of Cooper Ryder and Whitney, and we're talking about Edgar Sheehan's humble inquiry, where you talk about empathy and understanding what the children are all about. What is the message that is going across? About humility, yes, but why should you have an organizational culture which talks about appreciative inquiry and humble inquiry. This would largely depend upon the whole, the way, the cultural ethos of the school. What is the philosophy of the school? How is it that I'm going to make everybody feel good? It should be a feel-good factor. Like I said, I'm happy to come to school. I'm happy to ask questions. Let's learn together. But what are those questions? What are they emanating out of? There are several ways in which you could ask questions. The easiest and the most easy one, which you started when you were a baby, was to ask why. So start with the why, and you will come with a gamut of other questions dealing to effective learning, which would lead to effective inquiry, which would then lead to effective learning by themselves. So they will construct their own meaning. I'm talking about theory of constructivism here, where they will construct their own meaning, whereby they will lead to that kind of learning process. I'm not talking about the product, I'm talking about the process of learning rather than the product. So the school culture would rather depend upon making it a thinking environment.
Thank you so much, ma'am. I think the topic is getting more deep and more interesting. We should have some time for questions towards the end. I think we close by 6:15. But before we get into that, I wanted to ask Dr. Pavan, do you believe that schools, educators, and its leaders need to be wary of this definite possibility of contrived collegiality? How does one avoid that? On the one hand, we are looking at collaboration. We are looking at collaboration like the way Dr. Senthil spoke and what Minakshi ma'am just said. But how can we avoid the tendency of a contrived collegiality? Because that is going to definitely defeat the purpose of why we got into it, the very first place.
So I don't have much to contribute beyond what has been said. As a teacher, if we can be humble to our profession, and if we can take pride in continuous learning, which means that the only thing that has helped me as a teacher, and I guess many teachers would benefit from it, is that we need to be better at our profession. Teaching is a very responsible profession. And if I ensure that I'm better today than what I was yesterday, even if my students are not demanding me to be better, that is very, very critical. So students would not know how hollow you are, but you should know how hollow you are. So I'll pause there.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's indeed very well put. Before we get into the questions, I wanted to ask each of the panelists, because I'm sure we have a lot of school owners, academic leaders who are a part of today's audience. As leaders of schools, what do you think they must be wary of? What roadblocks do you think they should be aware of so that they can avoid, especially when they are trying to cultivate a positive school culture which respects the fact that collaboration and efficacy is nurtured within it? What roadblocks do you think they should be wary of? Dr. Senthil? So you're muted.
First and the foremost thing is that I just want to take a step back on that collegiality part of it, and then I'll come here.
Sure.
People, first of all, the leadership needs to kind of remove the specks of their bias or affinity, what they have when it comes to a classic example. I think many teachers sitting in this forum or principals will surely agree. A simple thing is the annual duty list, which gets committees and clubs, which gets released in the campus itself, is a classic example of contrived collegiality. You have 4 people and these 2 people will do. So you put 1 star against those 2 people, whether other do it or not, that's not the purpose. And I think you need to get over to this whole process. So the first thing is, first go and put up a blank chart paper on your notice board and ask people that these are the clubs and committees what you have. Please write into areas where exactly you would like to contribute. And you will surely, I can assure you with my limited experience, nobody will come and write for first 3 days. Unless you take a decision as a principal to scribble, not in your handwriting, but ask somebody else to write 2 things. And then you see a shift actually happening. So it starts with first the leaders themselves changing their mindset that there are a new set of people who are there. Because every campus which you go, I can tell you, there are hundreds of people sitting here. I can openly challenge all of them. The welcome address in their school is till date read by the English HOD, not by anybody else. Why, when you know the school has a culture, everybody can give a welcome address. Why English head of the department? And finally, a person who comes in, I call them as HOD English HOD welcome address and HOD vote of thanks. Because every program, the principal has to just look back, and then there is a gentleman or a lady who walks up and says, vote of thanks happened. So the whole thought process of this contrived collegiality, first the leaders should start change their mindset that we need to give opportunity to new set of people. That, like, Peter Sanjay talks about fear of failure. In schools, I can tell you, fear of success is a great challenge for teachers. They know if once they do one program properly, thereafter the life is over for them. Because till retirement, they will be only doing that again and again, till they become a failure. So that's where I think the fear of, and I have seen in many trainings, okay, whenever any new initiative is being thought about and a new youngster who is just 2 years in the campus raises the hand, and there's somebody who pushes the shirt from the back and say, don't get into it. You don't understand the culture of this place if you do it one. And even if he or she breaks that, and then after 6 months, when he or she walks up to staff room and says, did I join to teach this English, or did I join in the school to only prepare welcome addresses and speeches for somebody else in the campus? So that's something which we did. So teach first, as we say in India, a Sri Lankan proverb is very, very nice. When you try to look at a fish, the head of the fish, you don't have to look at the whole fish. You open the gills and you will find how fresh is the fish. So principals, my request, and the co-teachers, educators who are there, first, soch badaloge, I think things will start happening. So start changing your mindset first, rest of the things will happen. So that's something very, very important.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Can we have Dr. Pavan identify some roadblocks which the leaders must be wary of?
So one roadblock that I can think of is that and this is applicable to everybody, regardless of the rank and file. So the day you stop learning new stuff, you stop being a good teacher. So I guess, like any professional, you need to be on top of your game. You need to read books, you need to get yourself acquainted, you need to expand your knowledge base, you need to go deep, and you need to stay relevant, which means that as a teacher, you need to be a very good student first up. That's my view.
Great. Ma'am?
I think being a lifelong learner, that's the most important, because you're constantly learning, and change your attitude towards things around, your mindset in how you look at. Some of the roadblocks can be addressed by creating professional development sessions with teachers, because suddenly one fine day we cannot say, come on, we need to change. These are the things we're going to do, and you got to think like this. It doesn't happen, because mindsets take time, because this we've been doing it for donkey's years. Suddenly one fine day we cannot be changing the way we look at and approach things. So what is it that it is there for me to be a reflective practitioner? How can I look at my students and my school as a place worthy of what I want to deliver and feel accomplished? Not only talking about performances, student performances, I'm talking as a teacher. Just being a teacher, do I have that feeling of accomplishment? Do I have that feeling of empowering the students to think? How can they think beyond their textbooks? Can they have discussions in classrooms? So that would be how to generate those kind of dialogues in the class, the conversations in the class. And like Pavan said, keep reading, keep constantly reading. What is the one thing that will be very essential for all teachers is to read. You read books on education, books on anything, and also current affairs, because that's what you can start your discussion with. So that's really, really important. Another thing which I find a roadblock many times, people get selected because of their qualifications, not necessarily how educated they are. So what happens is that when you enter the classroom, you think you already know everything. But then you don't want to have this dialogue because I know it all. So when there are things which are changing in the world, are you adept to also make those changes in the classroom? So mastery of and competency of your knowledge, apart from what you are sort of selected for, can you have real life experiences? Can you connect to why am I learning all this? Is there some relevance? Is it engaging? Is it significant for me to put that real thought into it. What is the reason for me to learn, which I can take and have that enduring learning and understanding for the rest of my life.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm happy to see that the CEO of Grey Caps, that noted quizmaster Giri, is also amongst the audience, and he's been texting and putting some questions out in the chat box. He says, all of this can happen only when the teacher's load of teaching reduces. At least that's what I got a glimpse of when I was still speaking to all of you. Don't you think that at some level, we are going to start hearing voices which says, all of what you said today is fantastic, too good, but how are we going to find time for it? How are we going to make sure that, all of what we are expected to do as teachers is to be done? And on top of this, all of what you are saying also needs to be done. So how are they going to balance? And that would be my last question of the day for the panelists. Of course, we will take some audience questions for paucity of time. We will have to close by 6:15. But what do you think? How do you think teachers need to balance the realities versus their espoused expectations and yeah, go on. Their aspirations. That's the word I was looking for. Senthil sir.
Yeah. I think the question of Giri is very, very correct on the workload, because many a times what we find that there are no defined number of hours spent for anything. And just to tell Giri, I think he understands school very well. So he will also know that those will be the periods which will be taken away by the science and maths department, even if we are going to create for completing the portions, not for learning. So it's all about environment with supporting policies really need to kind of come into. A simple thing, every staff meeting, 15 minutes, one new learning by one particular teacher can be actually shared and worked upon. Just one, 15 minutes in every staff meeting, one new experience, which instead of talking in staff room, let them come to the common forum and start talking about it. The culture of openness, there can be a bouncing board, which can be kind of,
I think we've
lost him.
Yeah. Dr. Pavan, do you want to pitch in the meantime till Dr. Senthil reconnects?
For me, I guess what we need to understand is that teachers don't have to necessarily look for separate time to learn. What I mean to say is that when they are doing their regular chores, they can bring about some amount of variation so that they are testing their old wits. For example, this panel discussion. Nobody asked me to take down these notes. Correct. It was not a part of the plan, but I had to ensure that I'm adding some value here and I'm getting some value out of here, which means that even for the most mundane tasks, you can bring about 5% change and try new things and learn. If you think that I will go through the day and then I'll take my time to learn, it may not happen. Can you ensure that throughout the day, through the most mundane tasks, you can find small opportunities to learn? That way you will add value and you will not wait for that day, because that day, that time which is exclusively for learning may not come.
Absolutely. I think that's a very pragmatic advice that we've got from Dr. Pavan. Minakshi ma'am, do you want to say something?
I also feel that you cannot assign a particular period or something or a particular time like that. Teachers should be constantly on that move, constantly reading, constantly learning, and also teaching practices that go back into the classroom. There's no point in reading and a particular teaching strategy and not applying it in the classroom. So what are the skills that children need to know? What are the ways in which one teaching strategy that I can take to the class? Simple thing like brainstorming, the method of brainstorming. Can all the teachers get together? Like he said, like Dr. Senthil said, 15 minutes, how to actually conduct brainstorming, and then take it to class. What Giri said was at least if you assign that time and not get empowered by other teachers saying that I want it for science or maths, that the casteism of subjects need to go. Yeah, all subjects are equally important, and it is transdisciplinary. Nothing works in isolation over here. That maths is separate from language and arts. There's maths even in arts, and even in art and drawings and everything. So we cannot learn and live in isolation. Same, we need to share our experiences and then probably acknowledge just a, well done, Minakshi, you did very well by sharing this. It worked very well in my class as well. That amount of acknowledgement and, making the teacher feel good, that will encourage her to read more, share practices, something that is there. At the same time, the block could be, oh, this we have done, it doesn't work. So stay with your marigolds and not with your walnut trees. And that would really help in taking those practices forward. And bringing in a culture where teachers are open and not scared of hierarchy and the organogram and how they are placed. The way in which the teachers, the heads, how they are going to communicate with the teachers, that will be paramount. The roadblock would be from the top, how they are communicating to the teachers, and the favoritism. Get rid of all of that, and everybody works in a healthy climate, healthy environment. So it becomes a learning culture. It becomes a learning culture, and thereby the competencies would be encouraged and would trickle down into the class. So the whole school speaks the same language.
Absolutely.
And the same vision.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Can I now ask Nagmani if there are any audience questions? Nagmani, can you hear us?
Yes. There are a few audience questions which I would like to read out. And
I think we have time for 1 or 2 questions at best.
Yes. There is one question which talks about, do the teachers need to think about alternate transactional process just in case a typical methodological approach does not produce a satisfied outcome? If so, how does the teacher open up for acceptance?
Any of the panelists can take that question.
Yeah, take that question.
I think Mr. Senthil is not here, so I think we still missed him.
He's joined back now. He's joined back.
Yeah. So I think some of the practices, they should be tried and tested practices. It's not like a Google and say, take some practice. When you are preparing for a lesson or a concept-based lesson, asking questions and moving on, getting children to be curious about that learning process, some of those strategies are already tried and tested. Maybe it may not work in the class because of the way the instructions have gone to the classroom. So how would you bridge the gap in making the children understand that instruction? What was the outcome? What was the teacher expecting? If that didn't work, what are the 3 other differentiated learning methods? If this didn't work, can we try out this? Can we try out this? There should be 3 different ways in which, by way of content, by way of experience, and hands-on, what could be the way in which that particular lesson could be done. So what are all the various ways in which you could do that same lesson? The teacher should have it at the back of her mind, so that then you bridge the gap. There is no, lacuna in making that effective classroom. There, Dr. Senthil is there available now.
I have one question here, which has been sent directly to me. Just give me a second. Yeah, the question is from Sunil. I think I'll ask Dr. Pavan and Dr. Senthil to respond to this. And I think we will just have enough time to take this question. If there are any other questions that are there in the chat box, we will definitely make note of it and we will send it and request the panelists to give their responses whenever they have the time for it. The last question for the day. How far is giving autonomy to schools important, especially in the context where the future of students is decided by a single board examination? How can schools become a learning organization? Senthil, Dr. Senthil, are you able to hear us?
Yeah. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir. Do you want to go first?
I'm in a school and I think the power went off, so I had to kind of come joining through a mobile to make sure that I'm part of this. 2 things for Sonil. First is, I think with the new education policy coming in, if implemented in the letter and spirit, what has been defined, that question will get answered automatically. The relevance of board may go away is my thought, my personal thought, because with the 9, 10, 11, 12 things coming in, the purpose of board itself may not be conducting annual examination, but only doing assessment and certifications. With moving into competency-based education system, so probably my whole thought is my belief, because 2019 itself, when I talked about it, many people laughed at it and said that it's not possible, and it's already CUET is a classic example towards it. that if you're going to look at any graduation who is going to get into, is going to has to go through a kind of a program. And I think if he or she has to take up examination, he just needs a course completion certification with X competencies, and then he may have to kind of take up the CUET, and then may take up a special area. And already there are the choice of papers is quite a lot of choice of papers which CUET is actually planning about. So the autonomy will be there. And Sunil, I think you may not be aware that grade 1 to 8, I think the school can flirt with whatever is being given by any board. They provided the management is committed, the teachers have the sufficient idea towards it. Only problem is that the parent profile what you are catering, only the parent profile what you are catering is the major thing which people will, the schools may have to be a little cautious about. Because you may have all the good intent, but if the parent profile is not coming up and aligning with you, then I think you're out of the complete game. Take it from me, you will not be able to achieve whatever you are able to do. And a classic example is the fee payment which people did in the schools where there were actual learning was happening. They never had a problem of fee collection, but others did really had a problem of fee collection. If you're getting 80% of fee collected, I think thumbs up to you, be happy about it.
I think from efficacy, we've gone to economics, and I would like Dr. Pavan to respond.
I'm sorry about it, but that's, I think, Sunil's question was on autonomy. So that's where I want to kind of look at.
Dr. Pavan, do you want to have the last laugh, so to speak, with regards to learner autonomy?
Without a doubt, we need to give people autonomy, and I don't think it should be judged by what CBSE has to think. Life is bigger than CBSE, okay, bigger than marks. So if we don't give people autonomy, they don't live to their fullest potential. That's my fundamental belief.
And with that, we are right on the money with timing. Thank you all so much for a big thanks to the panelists for such an enriching discussion. I just did not realize that time just went flying. Thank you so much, Minakshi ma'am. Thank you, Senthil sir and Dr. Pavan, for such an enriching session. And thanks to all the participants who have stayed with us for a good part of 1 hour and 15 minutes. I must extend a special thanks to Teacher Tribe for also promoting the event on their portals. Thanks, everyone. We will come back with yet another session that is enriching in a similar manner on a different topic. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
And I would request all of you to take a screenshot of this board so that all these points that we have captured here are available to you. So please go ahead. It will be handy.
Thank you. Thank you, Pavan. And if
Mm.
there are any questions that have remained unanswered, please email it to info@clle.co. We will take up those questions, and we will try to pass it on to the panelists and request them to respond. Thank you all so much once again.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Take care.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for inviting me. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.